What if I told you that the Sunshine State, the dream destination for millions, could be on the edge of the biggest housing crash in modern U.S. history? Prices collapsing, homeowners fleeing, and insurance bills so high they're now bigger than the mortgage itself. Sounds impossible, right? Well, keep watching, because what's happening in Florida right now might just shock you. Florida has always been marketed as paradise. Palm trees, beaches, booming cities, and endless sunshine. But behind the beautiful skies, a storm is brewing, one that has nothing to do with hurricanes. Instead, it's a financial hurricane tearing through the real estate market. And the scary part? It's already started. More than 275,000 people are expected to leave Florida in 2025. That's right, after years of record population growth, the trend is reversing. Families, retirees, and even investors are packing their bags and saying, "We can't afford to live here anymore." Why? The reasons are shocking. Let's start with mortgages. Not long ago, during the pandemic boom, buyers were locking in loans at 3% interest rates. That meant affordable payments, even on expensive homes. But today, with rates hovering near 7%, the story is completely different. For the average Florida homebuyer, that's an extra $825 a month, gone, just like that. Families that stretched themselves to the limit to buy during the boom now find themselves underwater. Imagine this. You bought your dream house in Cape Coral in 2021, thinking you scored the deal of a lifetime. Fast forward to today, your monthly mortgage has doubled, your insurance is out of control, and now your home is worth $40,000 less than you paid for it. And that brings us to the next bombshell: insurance. Florida is now home to one of the most broken insurance markets in America. Premiums that once cost families $3,000 to $4,000 a year are now soaring to $12,000, even $15,000 annually. For many, that's more than the cost of their mortgage. Think about that for a second. People aren't just paying for a home anymore. They're paying a second ghost mortgage just to keep their home insured, and many simply can't do it. This has forced thousands to drop coverage altogether, leaving them completely vulnerable to storms, floods, and fires. And when hurricane season comes around, you can imagine the disaster waiting to unfold.
Investors pulling out. But it's not just everyday families feeling the heat. Even the big players, the institutional investors who once bought up entire neighborhoods, are pulling back. Just 2 years ago, they accounted for 25% of all sales. Today, that number is down to just 6%. That's a massive withdrawal of money from the market, and it's leaving sellers desperate. When Wall Street pulls out, you know something is wrong. And we can't ignore what's happening with Florida's condos. After the Surfside tragedy, new safety laws forced associations to inspect, repair, and strengthen aging buildings. That sounds good in theory, but the costs are crushing. Condo owners are being hit with special assessments ranging from $20,000 to $80,000 per unit. HOA fees doubled or even tripled. What used to be a retirement dream in Miami or Fort Lauderdale has now turned into a financial nightmare. And as you can guess, condo prices are tanking. Buyers are running away and owners are stuck. Flood zone shock. As if all this weren't enough, the government just dropped another bomb. FEMA's updated flood maps added 89,000 homes in Broward County alone into mandatory flood zones. That means tens of thousands of homeowners now face new mandatory flood insurance premiums, sometimes costing thousands per year on top of their already insane bills. And here's the kicker. Many of these families had no idea their homes were even at risk. Overnight, their property value fell, their bills soared, and their dreams collapsed. So what happens when mortgages double, insurance triples, investors flee, and homeowners get crushed by surprise bills? Inventory explodes. Right now, Florida has over 177,000 homes for sale. That's one of the largest surges in the nation. And with that much supply flooding the market, sellers have no choice but to slash prices. Price cuts are everywhere, from Cape Coral to Naples, from Pembroke Pines to Palm Bay. Thousands of homes are being reduced, sometimes by tens of thousands of dollars. And this is just the beginning. Cliffhanger end to part 1. So what does this all mean? Florida, the land of sunshine and dreams, is now ground zero for one of the most dangerous housing bubbles in America. But which cities are getting hit the hardest? Which neighborhoods could lose 50% or more of their value? And most importantly, can the governor's bold new policies actually stop this crisis before it turns into a full-blown collapse? Stick around, because in part 2, we'll dive deep into the 15 Florida cities at the epicenter of this housing crash, and the numbers will absolutely shock you.
You think the Florida housing crash is bad? Wait until you see the cities that are getting slammed the hardest. Some neighborhoods are watching homes lose tens of thousands of dollars in value, and this is only the beginning. Let's start with the city that's been called ground zero for Florida's crash, Cape Coral. During the pandemic boom, Cape Coral was one of the hottest markets in America. Homes were selling in hours, often above asking price. But today, it's a completely different story. Prices here have already dropped by over $75,000 on average. Inventory has skyrocketed, with for sale signs on nearly every block. Buyers who stretched to the max just a few years ago now face the brutal reality that their homes are worth far less than they owe. And with flood risks and insurance premiums rising, Cape Coral is becoming one of the most unaffordable and unstable markets in the state. Next up, Pembroke Pines and Miramar. These two South Florida cities were once seen as safer suburban havens outside of Miami. Families moved here in droves, believing they were investing in long-term stability. But here's the shocking twist. These communities are now some of the most exposed to insurance premium spikes and FEMA flood map changes. In Miramar, homes that once cost $350,000 are now burdened with insurance bills that rival luxury mortgages. And in Pembroke Pines, some neighborhoods were just slapped with mandatory flood insurance, pushing monthly costs up by hundreds of dollars overnight. It's no wonder listings are sitting on the market longer and longer. Now let's talk about Hollywood and Naples. Hollywood, Florida, once a quiet beachside community, is now seeing one of the fastest increases in insurance premiums anywhere in the state. Families who bought in 2020 and 2021 are being forced to sell, not because they want to, but because they simply can't afford to stay. And then there's Naples, known as one of the wealthiest retirement destinations in the U.S. If even the ultra-wealthy are cutting losses, you know the market is in trouble. Average prices here have already dropped over $40,000 already, and that decline is accelerating. Luxury condos that once sold instantly are now lingering on the market for months, with price reductions piling up. Heading up the coast, we find Palm Bay and Punta Gorda. Palm Bay was one of the fastest growing affordable housing hubs just a few years ago, but affordability has vanished. Rising insurance and property taxes have wiped out the very reason families moved there in the first place. And in Punta Gorda, the combination of hurricane risks, FEMA flood map rezoning, and special condo assessments are crushing retirees. For many, the Florida dream has turned into a nightmare of endless bills and shrinking property values. Another surprising hotspot, Lakeland. Located inland, many thought this area was safe from coastal risks, but Lakeland is proving that no part of Florida is immune. Housing inventory has ballooned, price cuts are becoming the norm, and buyers are holding back, waiting for even deeper discounts. And it's not just these cities. Across Broward, Collier, Lee, and Polk counties, the same story is repeating. Skyrocketing costs, collapsing demand, and values slipping away. Now here's where it gets even scarier. This crisis isn't stopping at city limits. What's happening in Cape Coral or Naples isn't isolated. It's a domino effect. When big markets crash, they drag nearby towns down with them. Retirees who plan to downsize in Florida are now canceling deals. Out-of-state investors who once flooded the market are retreating. And young families who hope to buy are realizing that even with falling prices, the true cost of ownership is higher than ever. So here's the big question. If these 15 cities are already in free fall,
What happens next? Will Florida's real estate market stabilize once prices fall enough? Or are we on the verge of something far bigger, something that could shake the entire U.S. housing market? Because here's the truth. What happens in Florida doesn't stay in Florida. Investors, insurance companies, and policymakers are all watching closely. And if this state collapses, the ripple effects could spread nationwide. And we haven't even touched on the scariest part yet. Because while cities crumble and families leave, Florida's governor is racing against time, introducing new policies to stop the bleeding. But will these moves actually save the housing market or just delay the inevitable crash? Stick with me, because in Part 3, we'll break down the governor's bold strategies and whether they're enough to rescue Florida from disaster.
Florida's housing market is spiraling. But here's the real twist. The state's governor is stepping in with bold new policies to stop the collapse. The big question is, will these moves save the market or make the crash even worse? Florida's leaders know the headlines aren't good. Families leaving, prices falling, insurance costs exploding, investors pulling out. So the governor has launched what can only be called a high-stakes rescue mission. The strategy? Attack the crisis on multiple fronts: insurance reform, housing affordability, and infrastructure upgrades. But each move comes with controversy, and critics are already warning it might not be enough. Insurance reforms. Let's start with the insurance crisis, the most explosive issue in the state right now. Homeowners are watching premiums triple or even quadruple. Some are paying $12,000 to $15,000 a year just to insure a basic home. That's insane. So the governor has rolled out a package of reforms designed to bring relief. This includes new efforts to lure private insurers back into the state, stricter regulations on claims litigation, and even subsidies for homeowners in high-risk areas. On paper, it sounds good. More competition, less fraud, cheaper rates. But here's the problem. None of this works overnight. Families crushed under today's premiums can't just wait 3 to 5 years for things to improve. And as one expert put it, even the best insurance reform can't fight the laws of nature. Hurricanes aren't getting weaker. Floods aren't disappearing, which means insurers still see Florida as a massive risk. Housing supply initiatives. Next, the governor is pushing to increase housing supply. With affordability in freefall, the state has launched incentives for builders to speed up new construction, particularly affordable housing projects. Developers are being offered tax breaks, fast-track permits, and grants to turn underused land into homes. The idea? More supply equals lower prices. Simple economics, right? But there's a catch. Builders themselves are nervous. Why start massive new projects when existing homes are already sitting unsold on the market? Why risk millions in developments when buyer demand is shrinking? So while the policies are ambitious, many in the industry say the timing couldn't be worse. Property tax and fee relief. Another measure gaining attention is the governor's push for property tax relief and reductions in some state fees tied to real estate transactions. The goal is to put money back in homeowners' pockets and keep deals moving. But again, the relief is relatively small compared to the massive hit families are taking from mortgages and insurance. Saving a couple thousand a year doesn't mean much when your insurance just jumped by 10 grand. Infrastructure and flood mitigation. Then there's infrastructure. After FEMA added tens of thousands of Florida homes to new flood zones, the state promised major investments in drainage systems, seawalls, and climate resiliency projects. Billions of dollars are being funneled into protecting communities from rising seas and stronger storms. But here's the sobering truth. These projects take years, even decades. And in the meantime, homeowners are already feeling the financial pain today. The critics speak. Critics argue that the governor's policies, while headline-grabbing, are too little, too late. They say the root of the crisis isn't just policy, it's math. Mortgages have doubled, insurance has tripled, and incomes haven't kept pace.
No amount of political spin can erase those numbers. And if prices continue to fall, all the relief packages in the world won't stop families from walking away. The supporters' view. But supporters tell a different story. They argue that Florida's market has survived downturns before, and that with the right leadership, it can recover again. They point to population growth still being strong overall, retirees still attracted to the sunshine, and global investors still seeing Florida as valuable long-term. To them, the governor's policies are a bridge, a way to stabilize the market until conditions improve. So who's right? The critics who say the crash is unstoppable, or the optimists who believe Florida can fight its way back? The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, but here's what nobody can deny. The governor is betting his political future on this crisis. If Florida stabilizes, he'll be seen as a hero. But if the housing market collapses on his watch, the fallout could be catastrophic, both economically and politically. And here's the scariest part. Even if Florida fixes insurance, builds more homes, and strengthens its infrastructure, there's still one giant problem left. Because behind all of this lies a force even the governor can't control: the national economy.